We're live. So today I want to focus on, excuse me, I want to focus on housing and how I think the migrants in the cities, the inner cities, total loss of control of the migrant situation is going to lead to skyrocketing rents all across America in the inner cities. And I'll focus mostly on DC and New York because those are the two cities I think in the spotlight. But I think the effect is going to happen all over the city, all over the inner cities in America. So one of the things you've probably seen, you may have heard a while back, was the migrant that um, uh, that housed a bunch of migrants in. There's a migrant that was housing a bunch of um, other migrants in New York City. And so one of the pictures that you saw that was kind of the thumbnail here was that migrant. I'll take a picture. His name was Ebro Sam. This is him here. And here's a picture of the old Fordham Library where migrants were staying. This guy had taken over a hotel, a library. And he was housing many migrants in city property. And you can see this picture to the right here. I think this is the picture from the cellar in a Queens furniture store that he also owned. And you can see how many migrants he had stacked on top of each other. No ventilation, no lights, no fresh air coming in. And these people were also cooking in here. If I had done that or any other American had attempted to do this or had done it, you'd be in prison for a very long time. But yet this man, whose profile having these people living like this, was allowed to go on and rent another house. A house in a neighborhood that many people like you and I would probably end up living. I mean, they showed the neighborhood. It looked like a typical American neighborhood where you or I might live. And this is in New York. A single family home in any part of the 5 boroughs would be very expensive, at least $500,000 minimum. And yet this guy rented this $500,000 home at minimum. And his intention, and the news was profiling this guy, which I found amazing as a landlord, that he intended, or he wasn't intending, he was doing it. He had already placed 10 people in the house. Can you imagine 10 people coming into your neighborhood? 10 men, 6 or 7 adults, 3 children, with many more to come, surely. People coming over all times of the day and night. These people working 24/7. Some working at night, some working in the daytime. It would totally change the character of your neighborhood. And so how are these people able to pull it off? Primarily because the cities have lost control to regulate this behavior. You go back to the picture of Mr. Ebro there. He's doing the government's work. He's willing to house people that the government has no ability to house. Look at these people here. This is a picture from the Roosevelt Hotel, and you can multiply this all over the country. Migrants, men mostly, who, well, they need housing now, as you can see they're in line, but they will one day be in line for housing vouchers, or maybe they'll find work to be able to pay their own rent. Either way it goes, that's going to be a lot of upward pressure on housing. Here's an interesting picture right outside the Roosevelt Hotel. Here's a lady, seemingly innocent looking lady, helping the migrants. But she's here giving the migrants socks. These guys were on the ground, sitting down. She came up to give them something free. They all jumped up. You can see the one standing here. He's up on his feet. And as soon as they jumped up, she turned around and started filming. I tell you no lie, she's a reporter. There are millions, if not billions of dollars at play, providing housing, food, shelter, clothing. Next will be education, healthcare, billions of dollars. You can't swim against that stream, and you're probably not going to be able to vote your way out of it. So you're going to have to make do with what you see here. That she's choosing to help other people, non-Americans, over her own people that are struggling. Right here in New York City. She's not giving out socks to New York City residents, not even the homeless that are sleeping on the streets now. She's probably never done it before. But there's some money somewhere in her giving out socks and reporting on it. She's probably never done a story on a homeless American, a veteran even. And so I think the cities are losing control, and people like Mr. Ebro will come to their aid, and the cities will have no choice but to look the other way because they can't provide housing for these people. You'll see this headline here. New York City officials clear another storefront illegal housing dozens of migrants in unsafe conditions. They're my people, Mr. Ebro said. He was feeding, housing the migrants in his furniture store, and he's able to do it cheaper than any city government can do. Of course he can. He doesn't have a deputy chief administrator of homeless housing services. He can discriminate. He can enforce the law more freely without all the policy regulations than the government. Matter of fact, the government, New York City, in one of its explanations for saving money, their decision was it would be cheaper to farm out the services. Well, Mr. Ebro is one of the people that's doing the business of the government. He's doing their bidding. And so as the government turns their eye and wink and nod at this behavior, the housing prices are only going to skyrocket. The rents are only going to skyrocket. As you can see here, the median home price in the United States is $420,000. In DC, it's $600,000. More now than during the event, COVID-19. The cities have lost control. There's nothing they can do. Because even if many of the residents can't afford the homes, the sheer demand from all of these men will drive the prices higher because big business will come in and house them, as they already are. Each of these men are worth more than most Americans can afford to pay in rent. Someone is willing to pay the rent of all of these men where they don't have to contribute, they don't have to work anywhere. They're living in a hotel now. But sooner or later, they'll be out of that hotel and they'll be competing against regular Americans for housing with the backing of the government or companies funded by the government. And you won't be able to do this in your home to make ends meet. Or maybe you will, but that may be the only way you'll be able to make it. So anyway, we have a Ice Cube in the chat. If you want to jump up, feel free. It's Ice Cube. So I was reading about DC and their housing, and this is one of the things I found very interesting. And this is an article published by Axios. Families with kids are being kept out of the most desirable neighborhoods. I'm sure they are. If they could afford it, they still would be kept out because they're not building any homes for families. That's one of the ways that big developers get around attracting the undesirables. Everyone knows that the government will supersize poor people's voucher to allow them a nice place to live. So what do the landlords do? Or the developers? They just don't have family-sized apartments. It's smart on their part. You have to give them credit for that. And so if we were to take a look at this article from the Washington Post, well, from Axios, sorry, you'll see it. This is a report, some research done by Howard University. And so here we are. The headline of the article is Howard University research reveals DC's rent controls, winners and losers. Well, if you're making policy, shouldn't there just be winners? Because if there are going to be losers, clearly big business is not going to lose, right? The poor people aren't writing the policy or not even influencing policy. It's going to be the rich people influencing policy. So clearly, we know who the losers are going to be. So let's take a look at this article here and see if we can make heads or tails of it. Let me get Mr. Ebro down here. So here's the article, Howard University. In the aftermath of COVID-19 and the nation's housing affordability crisis, rent control has again become a lever that policymakers are looking to pull. No matter the fact that it hasn't worked, but here we are. But as Washington, D.C. City Council tries to balance housing affordability with landlord realities, it is hitting a simple yet major stumbling block. It doesn't have enough data to make informed decisions. What they don't understand here is why they don't have enough data. We'll get into that later. The article goes on to quote the research head, Mr. Curbin. This is a big problem, and there just aren't enough data sets out there, says Hadar Curbin, economics professor and the director at Howard University. Center on Race and Wealth, as well as CHIRP. But rent control is no different than any other economic policy. There are winners and losers. I want you to focus on another thing he says here. Of course, the grant. This project was funded with a grant from the Association of Realtors here. But here's something that he says is interesting. He explained that rent control in D.C. only applies to rentals built before 1976. I'm not sure why. Buildings built after 1976, especially many of the larger modern rental complexes, are not subject to rent control and are largely owned by large businesses. That stipulation is important because older housing stock is largely owned by the Black community, which means rent control may be hobbling its wealth generation. In fact, median rent for all rent control buildings is $14.42 per month. 60% of the $2,500 monthly rent charged for median units in uncontrolled properties. I don't even understand why they tried this rent control concept. It's clearly been shown not to work. Nevertheless, they keep trying. Anyway, as DC gentrifies, many of its traditionally Black neighborhoods now house the affluent who may be benefiting from rent control, which typically has lax income verification. And that's very true. Here's one of the things that, if you think about it, income, what is income? If I win the lottery for $1 billion, my income is high for 1 year, but the next year I don't have any income. Well, I have interest income. But you see the point. The income is not characterized or not even dominated in the way that it used to be, that most people generated the bulk of their income from a job. So they had a W-2. There are many other ways to generate income or even additional income outside of receiving a W-2 or traditional job. While we're all for rent control, we never really thought about this other side of the equation. He doesn't understand human behavior. He never thought that the humans would come up with alternatives to these arbitrary rent laws. To what extent are those type of people benefiting? He's talking about the people who can massage their income and get these rent control units. As the population changes due to gentrification, our usual assumptions no longer apply. You know what they say about assumptions? So what they're going to have to do now is they're going to have to adjust these assumptions and policies based on race. Because in the ghettos now, if not the whites, the Hispanics are buying up the properties. And they're putting 4 or 5 people if they're Hispanics. And the higher income whites can just afford it. So they're at crossroads here as to what they can do policy-wise. Everyone wants to protect their turf, and that's why this data is so important. But they can't get the data because the data is fragmented. And that's what he either fails to realize or does not understand. And so what is a fragmented market? In economics, A fragmented market is a large market that has been divided into several segments with different preferences and demand patterns. This can happen due to economic factors such as behavior, etc. Think of barbershops. You can poll 100 people, very few of them get their hair cut by the same person. And the same thing goes with rent. Very few people have the same landlord unless they live in the same building together. And so the government is not able to gather all this data and make effective policy solutions, if they were able to make effective solutions at all. And so that is the problem, and why I think that rental prices will continue to skyrocket further. And I think for the landlords who are already in the business, they're really going to benefit. And for the people looking to get into the business, they really stand to benefit as well, because they stand to enter into a market that largely has lost the city's ability to regulate it. And that is what scared a lot of people off, as well as the new entrant to the market that I think has really affected how the cities are able to regulate housing is Facebook. I think Facebook is going to be a game changer in terms of the social credit score and how housing is rented going forward. I use Facebook now quite a bit to rent houses, to rent rooms. And it really allows me to do a credit check before I even send an email to the person. In days gone past, people would rent a room from me, and that would be the first time I saw the person when he showed up to see the place. Today, I can peruse that person's profile, send them a message, if I so choose, determine how they respond, before I ever even show them the place. I have all their demographics, who their friends are, their likes, the things they post, how early they post in the morning. And those type of things, I think, are much more valuable than a credit profile from FICO or something. We have a commenter in the chat. Feel free to join if you like. This is Ice Cube or something like that. Feel free to join. Anyway, back to Facebook. So with that said, being about Facebook, here's one of the things that I read about the other day. And you'll see, HUD alleges that Facebook allows advertisers to control which users receive housing-related ads and express unlawful preferences by offering discriminatory options, allowing them, in effect, to limit, basically what they're saying, to limit who's able to see which ads for an apartment. So you may not even see the ads for an apartment. They won't even discriminate against you face to face because you won't even see the ad. And so if HUD wants to somehow sue Facebook for this, but with software being introduced into housing, I think that it's going to be very, very difficult, even for the federal government, to enforce some of these housing discrimination laws. Again, I think it's another advantage for the landlord in the long term, and that you'll have a better control of who you even interact with initially about renting your places. Anyway, I think it's been a pretty good podcast. If we don't have anyone in the chat, we'll finish up with our next topic coming up next time. That'll be Facebook as the next credit score. I'll kind of go into some of the detail. Maybe I'll even walk you through how I assess potential renters using Facebook as opposed to some of the older line technologies like Craigslist, or even putting an ad in the paper or something like that. So I think it'll be an interesting topic. And for the landlords that are using some of the more traditional ways of finding tenants or guests, if you're doing short term, I think you'll find the next episode to be well worth your while. Again, thank you for joining, and signing off.